Paris Accord fallout. Supporters of President Trump are backing his decision to pull out of a global climate deal. Congress reacts.
The accord would have created an explosion of green energy jobs for the future.
Division on Capitol Hill over the president's decision is not along party lines. Care for creation. The cardinal who helped Pope Francis write his encyclical on the environment sits down with News Nightly. And Pope Francis takes questions from kids, how his answers could help us all. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, June 2nd, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. The White House defends President Trump's decision to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord, saying it makes sense for America. We have team coverage tonight. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi will bring us reaction from lawmakers. But first, Mark Irons brings us the response from the White House. Mark?
Wyatt, today President Trump's supporters say his decision to leave the global pact will save jobs and promote business. Reporters tried to get the White House to say whether the president believes climate change is real and a threat. But the administration says it all boils down to the economy.
Scott Pruitt, head of the EPA, says President Trump left the Paris deal because it would have been bad for the country.
This is not a message to anyone in the world that America is should be apologetic of its CO2 position. We are actually making tremendous advances. We're just not going to agree to frameworks and agreements that put us at an economic disadvantage.
Vice President Pence calls Trump's decision refreshing. The president says he's putting America first.
My job as president is to do everything within my power to give America a level playing field.
Trump says staying in the agreement would amount to a self-inflicted major economic wound, costing as many as 2.7 million jobs by 2025 and contributing to a drop in GDP of almost $3 trillion by 2040. The president argues that because other major pollutants like India and China aren't held to higher standards, U.S. participation won't help the environment.
14 days of carbon emissions from China alone would wipe out the gains from America.
The Trump administration believes the United States can continue to fight climate change, just in other ways.
The president says he is willing to negotiate back into the Paris deal under terms that are fair to the U.S. and its workers. But a joint statement by the leaders of Germany, France, and Italy says the deal cannot be renegotiated. Wyatt?
Mark Irons reporting from the White House. Thanks, Mark. And correspondent Jason Calvi continues our team coverage from Capitol Hill, where the president's decision is dividing lawmakers. Jason?
Wyatt, jobs. That's the message of Republicans backing the president's exit. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says Trump put families and jobs ahead of left-wing ideology. But the president's opponents say Mr. Trump has made a major mistake.
Congress is on recess, but House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi returned to the Capitol to criticize the president's climate accord exit.
Faith leaders, starting with His Holiness Pope Francis, to the evangelical community, have urged us to be responsible stewards of the beauty of God's creation.
Pelosi herself isn't as willing to quote the Pope on other issues where they disagree, like abortion. Another Catholic on the Hill, Speaker Paul Ryan, calls the Paris Accord a raw deal for the United States. He writes, it was signed by President Obama without Senate ratification. It would have driven up the cost of energy, hitting middle-class and low-income Americans the hardest. One state already hit hard is Kentucky, represented by Republican Rand Paul, who's praising the move.
We've been devastated in Kentucky with the loss of jobs in the coal community. And I think that the Paris Accords would cost us to lose millions of more jobs in the energy industry, not just coal, but across all varieties of fossil fuels.
Leader Pelosi says the Paris Accord would have been a job creator.
The accord would have created an explosion of green energy jobs for the future, to keep America preeminent and #1 for the jobs of the future.
But investors seemed pleased. Stock prices rose as President Trump announced his exit yesterday.
Republicans point to the financial benefits of pulling out. The United States will stop giving to the UN-managed Green Climate Fund. President Obama promised $3 billion and already donated $1 billion. Wyatt?
Jason, it seems like a lot of this debate has been on party lines. Is that true?
A lot of it has been, but West Virginia Democrat Senator Joe Manchin, who's from a coal state, says the Paris Agreement didn't strike the right balance between environment and economy, and Florida Republican Carlos Curbelo called the Trump decision a strategic mistake.
Okay, division even among party lines here. Correspondent Jason Calvi reporting from Capitol Hill. Thanks, Jason. Join us now in studio is Katie Tubb, a policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation, to talk more about Trump's climate decision. Katie, can you briefly tell us what exactly the climate pact is, and will it overall have a positive impact on the world, the environment?
It's a great question as people try and figure out what's been going on. So the United States committed to 26 to 28% cuts in greenhouse gases by the year 2025, with the intention of cutting all the way up to 80% by the year 2050. Other countries committed to similar agreements, but the point was to get all the nations onto one climate treaty, which has been in the works for over 2 decades now. As far as what it would accomplish with global temperatures, this is one of, I think, the least favorable aspects of the Paris Accord. There would be no climate impact. When you look at the next 100 years, we're talking about 0.2 of a degree Celsius, should everyone follow through with their agreements.
So you say President Trump was right to leave the accord. Why is that decision the right one?
Absolutely. If we're concerned about the environment, if we're concerned about global warming, Paris is not the vehicle to a solution. As I said, 0.2 of a degree Celsius by the end of the century is not a measurable impact on global temperature. So I think that's a key part of it. Another part is there's a lot of economic damage involved in getting to those 0.2 of a degree Celsius. At the Heritage Foundation, we have the same modeling system as the U.S. Energy Information Administration. And we modeled what 26 to 28% cuts would do to the economy. And we're talking about $20,000 per family of 4 lost. Obviously, that hurts middle and low-income families the most because they have less ability to take that hit.
World leaders say that the president has made a grave mistake in this. They say he's isolated himself among some allies, and some say it's an abdication of his responsibility. What's your response to that? 2
things. First, candidate Trump was very forthright on the campaign trail that he was going to withdraw the United States from the Paris Protocol. I think it's a mark of leadership when someone holds true to their word. Past administrations have drawn many red lines and not held true to that. And I think in that respect, President Trump has shown a lot of leadership. I think the second part of that answer, though, is the Paris Protocol is not good for Americans, and it's not good for the people of the world. As I talked about earlier, this is very expensive, and there are people around the world who have much less than the United States as far as access to affordable and reliable energy. The Paris Protocol hits affordable and reliable energy first. And that's, again, hardest for the poor to deal with.
You mentioned the poor, and you'd mentioned low income earlier. Pope Francis is especially concerned about climate change, as you know, and how that affects the poor. How do you think climate change, or specifically how we can help people in developing countries, noting the fact that there is climate change?
I think a big component of that is raising the standard of living, helping people better themselves, seek opportunities, and in essence, adapt should climate become a problem. There are people around the world who do not have access to any electricity, and that has serious implications right now for their health and for their opportunities in life. If we can start addressing those, I think that's a big step forward. And I would point to the example of China. There's a lot of people there who are slowly seeing opportunity come to their feet, but there are also problems with clean air issues. That's an issue we can handle right now.
Katie Tubb, policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation. Thanks so much for talking with us.
Thanks for having me.
The Trump administration asked the Supreme Court to immediately reinstate the president's revised immigration order. It bars travelers from 6 mostly Muslim countries from entering the U.S. for 90 days. The order has been blocked by lower courts. The Filipino military is rejecting ISIS' claim of responsibility for an attack on a Manila casino where 36 people died. Police believe it was a robbery gone wrong. Witnesses say a masked gunman stormed the casino, setting fire to tables and shooting at gambling machines. The suspect didn't shoot anyone, but dozens died from smoke inhalation. Police say more than 70 people were injured in a stampede. Authorities say after the attack, The suspect forced his way into a room in a nearby hotel and killed himself. His motive is unclear.
We are still investigating and trying to ascertain why somebody would be so senseless and have such a motive. That is still to be determined.
Authorities stress they found no evidence of terrorism. People gathered today to light candles and place flowers at a makeshift memorial for the victims. A protest in downtown Kabul, Afghanistan turns deadly as police try to control the crowds. Authorities say the violence left several protesters dead and at least 4 officers injured. Hundreds of Afghans took to the streets to rally against the country's leaders, accusing them of not protecting citizens from militant groups like the Taliban and ISIS. This following a truck bombing that killed 90 people Wednesday. Nigerian officials say that 82 Chibok schoolgirls recently released by Boko Haram will soon join a special rehabilitation program. The country's Minister of Women's Affairs says the girls will catch up on their studies. Plus, they'll get medical care to recover from the trauma of 3 years in captivity. Officials say the girls will not be returning to rural Chibok, where they were abducted. Nearly 300 young women were seized in the mass kidnapping in 2014. Pope Francis blasts what he calls the merchants of death. His monthly prayer intention is to eliminate the arms trade.
Acabemos con esta situación.
The Holy Father says it is an absurd contradiction to speak of peace and at the same time promote or permit arms. He asks people to pray for an end of weapon sales, which are used to victimize innocent people. The Holy Father answers tough questions from children. He met today with a group of middle school students.
Mi chiamo Tanio, sono nato in Bulgaria.
A young boy told Francis he was left at an orphanage when he was just 5 years old. He asked, how can we believe God loves us when we lose people in this way? The Pope admitted he has questions too when he sees children suffer. He says there are no good answers, but proof God loves us comes from those around us who show love. Coming up, our one-on-one interview with Cardinal Peter Turkson and the Catholic lens on environmental issues. Plus, Pope Francis has tips on how to be a humble leader.
Sapendo che siamo peccatori e che l'unico Signore è Gesù.
Pope Francis focuses on St. Peter during Mass this morning at the Vatican. The Holy Father says Jesus trusted his sheep to Peter even though he was sinful and made mistakes. Pope Francis says leaders should serve with humility as Jesus did. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. Pope Francis has provided a uniquely Catholic perspective on environmental issues with his letter on caring for our planet, Laudato Si. Cardinal Peter Turkson, who helped the Holy Father draft that document, tells our Lauren Ashburn the Church cares about climate change because it has an impact on the human person. Lauren sat down with the Vatican official who heads a new dicastery or department on integral human development.
When we talk about climate change, we talk about, of course, change in temperatures and all of that. But we're talking also about the effect of changing temperatures on the physical environment in which we live and the impact of this on the human occupants of these physical spaces and environment. And, you know, it's not just a question about drought. It's not a question of short supply of water. It's a question about the quality of water, quality of food, quality of, even the fruits that grow in those environments, and the quality of insects and their, cross-pollination habits. And so it's a whole array of, if you want, biodiversity and the relation of those, these elements with the health issues. So climate change and its impact on health care is something that is basic and, even proven by doctors and health sciences.
Let's talk about your dicastery, which is quite large. Mm-hmm. What did Pope Francis tell you should be your first issue?
But what's essential that about the centrality of the human person and the need to consider how these other 4 dicasteries hitherto have been addressing issue of the human person, but from different dicastery points of view.
Why is it important to have it all come together? These were separate dicasteries, right?
Certain issues are transversal.
Like?
Healthcare, poverty, migration. Migration is not simply the movement of people. It's a consideration of the causes of the movement of people. Why do people have to move? Then you're talking about famine, or you're talking about war and conflict. If you're talking about war and conflict, then it's lack of peace. Then the discussion takes you into peace and war issues. If it's about farming, then I think it's about climate change. And so these are all transversal issues which, which intersect and cross.
So what are you expecting to do specifically to come out of this dicastery?
To deepen our understanding of the church's social thought. As you know, this is an area of church teaching which is began, but which is not yet ended. So if you take the compendium of the church's social thought, which is a collection of all of these, you not find in there anything about robots or artificial intelligence. This is a new thing that has come up in human existence. It's up to us now, what are the lessons we can draw from revealed truth, from the tradition of the church, from theology, from sciences and all of that, to this new issue which is now a challenge, for the church.
Why is it a challenge?
I mean, is it going to take jobs or it's not going to take jobs? Is artificial intelligence going to mean, for example, that the role of people in decision taking is going to be diminished or to be reduced? Here we are in Georgetown, and somebody who works in this from Silicon Valley tells me, for example, that it will be good for universities to train people in things that they can do better than the machine, because the machine can think faster in certain situations than the human brain. So if you're training people in a university and you train them to do something that artificial intelligence can do faster, it's a non-starter. You're wasting their time. So in so very many ways, the impact on this on human culture is immense. And that needs to be discovered, that needs to be explored, so we can provide new guidance for humanity.
But some people say that we should go back to the agrarian society, that was actually a very prosperous time for us, and that robots are going to make it so that people don't have jobs to do.
This culture has already begun, and there's not going to be any way that we can shut it out. So the thing rather is to face it squarely and see what kind of moral, ethical guidance we can provide for this new science that is emerging.
Thank you so much. Cardinal Peter Turkson, Director of the Vatican Dicastery on Integral Human Development.
Thank you.
This week on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, Catherine Zeltner talks to Utah Senator Mike Lee about his work in the pro-life movement. He encourages all those supporting life to be vocal on social media and spread the message of truth.
Post articles when you see them about the fact that at 20 weeks of fetal development, it's a known scientific fact that a baby can experience pain, such that an abortion taking place after that needs to be viewed in the barbaric light in which the scientific research suggests that it should be viewed.
This week, Catherine also speaks to Arizona Representative Trent Franks. You can see the conversations tonight at 11 p.m. Eastern right here on EWTN. Pro-Life Weekly also airs Sunday morning at 10. Vice President Mike Pence joins delegates from across the world for prayer and discussion next week at the 13th Annual National Catholic Prayer Breakfast in Washington. EWTN will bring you comprehensive coverage of the event. Lauren Ashburn will host live coverage starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Tuesday, June 6th. We hope you'll join us. Up next, the growing pressure facing Catholic hospitals. And we hear from this year's National Spelling Bee winner.
I studied like a couple of hours every day.
How this 12-year-old from California came out on top. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. 1 in 6 Americans receives medical care from a Catholic hospital, but the ACLU says patients admitted to Catholic hospitals have been denied care because they follow guidelines from the bishops on certain moral issues. That's sparking outrage among Catholic healthcare providers. Joining us now is Stephanie Slade, managing editor of Reason, a libertarian magazine. Stephanie recently wrote about why the ACLU is targeting Catholic hospitals and what it means for communities across the United States. Stephanie, you point out a series of legal battles here. What is the beef with Catholic hospitals?
So one of the things that these directives that the U.S. bishops put out says is, not surprisingly, that Catholic hospitals cannot perform abortions, direct abortions, or elective sterilization procedures. But the ACLU believes that there is a fundamental right, apparently, to have an abortion or to have a sterilization procedure when and where a person chooses. They've decided that that's important enough that they've launched this flurry of legal lawsuits against Catholic hospital systems and against the Catholic bishops themselves to try to force these hospitals to do these procedures to which the Church is obviously morally opposed.
And because they're pushing so hard, the ACLU is against Catholic hospitals, many people are worried that it's going to drive medical care, out of
hands of people who really need it. What do you think about that?
Sure. Well, obviously many Catholic hospitals exist in inner cities. They serve poor communities. Sometimes they're the only hospital in a particular rural community. So a lot of people are relying on these hospitals for their care. If they were driven out, it would affect many people. And the ACLU seems to think that that's an argument for forcing the Catholic hospitals to do what it wants, as opposed to for getting out of the way and letting the hospitals serve, Catholic hospitals serve people like they always have.
The ACLU says, I want to at least quote them here, it says, Catholic hospitals, quote, use their religious identity to discriminate against and harm women. What's your response to that?
I think it's important to remember that just as all doctors don't, do every kind of medicine, all hospitals don't do every kind of medicine either. You can't go to any given hospital and expect them to do neurosurgery. Some hospitals don't do that, for example. And it wouldn't make sense for me to show up at a hospital and say, I demand that you do neurosurgery on me. In the same way, you just can't necessarily force, in a free society, you just can't force a hospital to do something, or a person, a medical practitioner, to do something against their will. That's not consistent with who we are, with the way our system is structured, or with what we believe based on the First Amendment.
Well, as you know, Catholics have been taking care of the sick for centuries. It's been going on since the Middle Ages, at least. Can you give us a snapshot of that legacy?
Sure. One of the things that I found when I was doing research for this piece that I wrote was that many of the first hospitals in this country, especially out in the frontier in the West as we were settling, North America, they were all started by, in particular, orders of religious women. And so these people were providing care to a country that didn't have any other form of sort of formalized care. They pioneered these services, and so now to say, looking back at that, to conclude that they don't deserve to be able to continue to serve the communities that they exist in, just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, it's a contentious issue, and we're glad that you're shining the spotlight on it and all the good work the Catholic hospitals do. Stephanie Slade, managing editor of Reason magazine. Thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you.
Catholic travelers with long layovers on Sundays are likely to find a chapel at airports. A recent study reveals that 40% of U.S. airports offer Sunday Mass for travelers and airport employees. Boston's Logan International Airport was reportedly the first to welcome a chapel over 60 years ago. To learn more about chapels in America's airports, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Finally tonight, if you think you're a pretty good speller, we found a 12-year-old who has beat you. Anaya Vinya from Fresno, California came out on top of the 2017 National Spelling Bee. She outlasted 291 other kids to lay her hands on the trophy and the $40,000 grand prize. So what was the winning word? Macrocane, a dress fabric. Vinay says she spent several hours a day practicing with lots of encouragement from her parents.
Well, they just taught me that if you work hard, you can do anything. So since I was a good reader, I just became a good speller and I worked at it.
This is the first time since 2013 that the spelling bee declared a sole champion. At least last 3 years have ended in a tie. And by the way, she ended up spelling 35 words correctly, and she says she knew them all. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Good night, and God bless.